The frigid waters of the Red River roared beneath Willow Lancaster's skirts as she waded deeper, her wedding dress billowing around her like a shroud. The year was 1876, and the frontier town of Redemption Creek, Texas, had stolen everything from her: first her dreams, then her dignity, and soon it would claim her life. She closed her eyes as the current tugged at her body, welcoming the cold embrace that promised to wash away her shame. Luke Blackwood had been tracking a wounded buck since dawn when he spotted something white against the muddy water, something that had no business being in the rushing river. Squinting against the setting sun, his heart seized in his chest when he realized it was a woman. Without a second thought, he spurred his horse down the embankment, leaped into the knee-deep water, and grabbed her arm just as she was about to surrender to the current. "Not today," he growled, hauling her back toward the shore. "Whatever's driving you to this, it ain't worth your life." Willow fought against his grip, her sodden wedding dress heavy as lead. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. "You have no right." Luke's grip tightened as he dragged her to the muddy bank. "Maybe not. But I got no intention of watching someone throw away what the good Lord gave them." His voice was rough but not unkind, a voice accustomed to giving orders to cattle and cowboys alike. Once on shore, Willow collapsed in a heap of wet silk and lace, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "You don't understand," she whispered, her teeth chattering from cold and shock. "I can't go back there. I can't face them." Luke removed his duster and draped it over her trembling shoulders. He wasn't a man of many words, but something about her desperate eyes made him want to try. "I don't know what back there means, miss, but you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to." He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Luke Blackwood, got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." She looked up at him, mascara streaking down her pale face. "Willow Lancaster. Or it was supposed to be Willow Montgomery today." She gestured to her ruined wedding dress. "Until I discovered what kind of man Gilbert Montgomery truly is." Luke nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Montgomery was one of the wealthiest cattle barons in the territory, and one with a reputation that made decent men keep their distance. "Well, Miss Lancaster, seems to me you've had enough trouble for one day. My sister's place isn't far. She can help get you dry and sorted." Willow stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before finally taking it. "Why would you help a stranger?" Luke helped her to her feet, his calloused hand gentle against her delicate one. "Out here, kindness ain't a luxury, madam. It's how we survive." As he led her to his horse, neither of them could have known that this moment a desperate woman pulled from the brink of death by a man who refused to look away would forever alter the course of their lives. The ride to Luke's sister's homestead was silent, with Willow clutching his waist as they traversed the rugged terrain. Her wedding dress had been simplified for the frontier, but even without the grandeur of Eastern fashions, it was still a pathetic, muddy mess draped over his horse. The beaded bodice scratched against her skin with every movement, a constant reminder of the ceremony that had never been completed. "My sister, Sarah's a widow," Luke explained as they approached a modest but well-kept cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. "She's got a kind heart but a sharp tongue, so don't mind her if she speaks her mind." Willow nodded numbly, too exhausted to respond. The warmth radiating from Luke's broad back was the only thing keeping her from slipping back into despair. Sarah Blackwood turned out to be a petite woman with Luke's same steely blue eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She took one look at Willow's bedraggled state and immediately set to work, ushering her inside without a single probing question. "Luke, fetch that tin tub from the back." "I'll heat some water," she ordered, already removing Willow's duster. "You poor thing, you're half frozen." Within the hour, Willow found herself soaking in a bath behind a privacy screen, wearing borrowed clothes laid out by Sarah and sipping hot tea laced with whiskey. The warmth seeped into her bones, but the hollowness in her chest remained. "Montgomery's bride, ain't you?" Sarah asked bluntly, sitting in a rocking chair mending a shirt. "Whole town's been talking about the wedding for weeks." Willow's hands trembled around the mug. "I was to be." "Well, I reckon there's a story there, but it can wait till you've had rest," Sarah said, surprising Willow with her restraint. Luke's outside seeing to the animals. He'll sleep in the barn tonight. Willow felt a pang of guilt. I don't want to impose nonsense. That brother of mine wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah set down her mending and looked Willow square in the eyes. Whatever drove you to that river today, just know you're safe here. Those simple words broke something inside Willow. The tears came without warning, great heaving sobs that seemed to rise from the depths of her soul. Sarah simply moved to sit beside her on the bed, a comforting hand on her back, letting her cry until there were no tears left. When Luke returned from the barn, he found Willow asleep on his sister's bed, her face still bearing the traces of tears. Sarah met him by the door, her expression grim. Montgomery? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded. Most likely, but there's more to it, I suspect. She's carrying a heavy burden, that one. Luke's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about Montgomery's business dealings and treatment of women, but he kept to his own land and his own affairs. Now, looking at the sleeping woman whose life he'd saved, he felt a responsibility he couldn't explain. She can stay as long as she needs, he said. Sarah studied her brother's face with knowing eyes. Just be careful, Luke. That girl's running from something powerful, and getting mixed up in Montgomery's business is dangerous for a small rancher like you. Luke simply nodded. He'd faced down rustlers, survived the Civil War as a young man, and weathered drought and disease in his livestock. He wasn't afraid of Gilbert Montgomery or any man who'd drive a woman to such desperation. What he didn't say, what he hardly admitted to himself, was that something about Willow Lancaster had stirred feelings he'd long thought buried with his wife and child 6 years ago. Morning came with the gentle sounds of a homestead awakening, chickens clucking, the distant lowing of cattle, and the rhythmic chopping of wood. Willow opened her eyes to unfamiliar surroundings, momentarily disoriented until the previous day's events came rushing back. She had nearly died. Would have died if not for the cowboy. Luke, rising from bed, she found a simple calico dress laid out for her, clearly one of Sarah's, though Willow was taller by several inches. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main room of the cabin. Through the window, she caught sight of Luke splitting logs, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders with sweat despite the morning chill. He worked with the efficient movements of a man accustomed to physical labor, each stroke of the axe precise and powerful. He's been at it since dawn, Sarah said, making Willow jump. The older woman smiled knowingly as she kneaded dough at the table. Always works harder when he's troubled about something. Willow felt her cheeks warm. I've caused you both so much trouble. Nonsense. Luke's ranch is doing well enough these days that he can afford a morning away. Sarah gestured for Willow to sit. Now I've got coffee brewing and biscuits about to go in the oven, but first I think we need to discuss what happens next. Willow's stomach clenched. I can't go back to town. I gathered as much. Care to tell me why? The door opened before Willow could respond, and Luke entered carrying an armload of firewood. His eyes met hers briefly before he nodded a greeting and stacked the wood by the hearth. Morning, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sleep well. As well as could be expected, Willow replied softly. Thank you both for your kindness. Luke leaned against the wall, studying her over the rim of his cup. In the light of day, he could see her properly for the first time. Her honey blonde hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep, clear green, held a wariness that spoke of recent hurt. But there was strength there too, beneath the fragility. You're welcome to stay until you sort things out, he said. But Sarah's right that we should know what we're dealing with. Montgomery ain't a man who takes kindly to losing what he considers his. Willow's hands twisted in her lap. I was a fool, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. My father died last year, leaving me with debts I couldn't pay. Gilbert offered to clear them all if I would marry him. He seemed so kind, so generous. She swallowed hard. Until yesterday, the wedding day, Sarah prompted gently. I overheard him speaking with his business partner. Willow's voice hardened. He laughed about how he'd acquired a pretty, educated wife who could help him gain entry into Dallas society and how he planned to continue his arrangements with other women. And then, she faltered, looking down at her hands, and then, Luke's voice was dangerously quiet. They discussed the real reason Gilbert wanted my father's land. Apparently, there's a planned railroad route coming through, and he's been buying up properties along the way, including ours. Willow looked up, her eyes flashing with anger now. My father killed himself over debts that Gilbert's bank manufactured specifically to force the sale. Sarah gasped softly, but Luke's expression merely darkened, as if he'd suspected something of the sort. When I confronted him, Willow touched her cheek, where the faintest trace of a bruise was visible beneath her fair skin. He made it clear that once we were married, I would keep such concerns to myself if I knew what was good for me. Luke set down his cup with deliberate care. So you ran, Willow nodded. I fled the church before the ceremony, wandered for hours. By the time I reached the river, I felt I had nowhere left to go. Montgomery owns the sheriff, the mayor. Even the pastor was willing to rush the ceremony despite my obvious distress. And now, Sarah asked, what do you want to do? Willow looked between the siblings, these strangers who had shown her more kindness in one night than she'd experienced in months. I need to leave the territory, start fresh somewhere Montgomery can't reach me. Luke exchanged a glance with his sister. That won't be easy. Man like that has connections across Texas. I know, Willow said, her voice steadier now, but I can't stay here and wait for him to find me. I won't be anyone's property. Something like admiration flickered in Luke's eyes. Well, first things first. You need a safe place while we figure out your next steps. My ranch is far enough from town that Montgomery's men aren't likely to come looking. Luke, Sarah cautioned, are you sure that's wise? A single woman staying at your place, she can have the cabin. I'll bunk in with the hands, Luke said firmly. It's the safest option, Sarah. Your place is too close to the main road. Willow looked between them, overwhelmed by their willingness to risk Montgomery's wrath on her behalf. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Luke's gaze was steady, unflinching. Let's just say I've seen what men like Montgomery can do when they think they own someone. I couldn't live with myself if I turned you away. The simplicity of his answer, the quiet certainty in his voice, made Willow's throat tighten with emotion. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something dangerously close to hope. What she couldn't possibly know was that Luke Blackwood had his own reasons for standing against Gilbert Montgomery, reasons that went beyond the natural desire to protect a woman in distress. Reasons rooted in a past that was about to collide with their present in ways none of them could foresee. Luke's ranch was modest by Texas standards, 200 acres of decent grazing land with a small herd of cattle, a few horses, and a clear spring that ran year-round. The main house was a solid 2-room cabin with a stone chimney, built by Luke's own hands after he'd returned from the war. A bunkhouse for his 3 ranch hands stood nearby, along with a barn and corral. It wasn't grand, but it was clean and well-maintained, the home of a man who took pride in his work and expected the same from those around him. It's beautiful, Willow said honestly as they rode up to the homestead. After a hearty breakfast at Sarah's, Luke had insisted they move quickly, aware that Montgomery would likely have men searching for his runaway bride by now. Luke glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Most town women would see his place as primitive compared to the comforts they were accustomed to. It serves its purpose, he said with a shrug, but she caught the hint of pride in his tone. 3 men emerged from the bunkhouse as they approached a grizzled older cowboy with a limp, a young Mexican vaquero, and a middle-aged man with spectacles that seemed out of place on his weathered face. Boys, this is Miss Lancaster, Luke said as he helped Willow down from his horse. She'll be staying in the main house for a while. I'll be bunking with you. If the men were curious about the sudden appearance of a young woman on their isolated ranch, they didn't show it. The older man touched the brim of his hat. Madam. I'm Hank Weber, foreman around here when the boss ain't looking. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Weber, Willow replied, trying to maintain her composure despite her awareness of how strange her presence must seem. That's Miguel Sanchez, best horseman in 3 counties, Luke continued, nodding toward the vaquero, who gave a respectful nod. And Doc Phillips, who gave up medicine in St. Louis to raise cattle, though he still patches us up when needed. The man with spectacles smiled. Academic medicine became tedious. I prefer practical applications and fresh air. Willow couldn't help but smile back. A doctor who prefers cows to patients, that's quite unusual. You'll find we're all a bit unusual out here, Miss Lancaster, Doc Phillips replied with a wink. Luke cleared his throat. Hank, anything need my attention before I get Miss Lancaster settled? Nothing that can't wait, boss. Though Johnson rode by earlier, said Montgomery's offering a reward for information about his missing bride, words spreading fast. Willow paled and Luke instinctively moved closer to her, his solid presence reassuring. That was quick, even for him. Anything else? Hank scratched his beard. Just that the widow Parker passed yesterday, funerals tomorrow. Luke's expression softened with genuine regret. She was a good woman, we'll pay our respects. He turned to Willow. Let's get you inside. The interior of Luke's cabin was surprisingly comfortable, simple furnishings built for durability rather than show, but there were touches that spoke of care. Hand-woven curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt covered the bed in the small bedroom, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that made Willow's eyes widen in surprise. You're a reader, she said, running her fingers along the spine's history, philosophy, even some poetry. Luke looked almost embarrassed. Winter nights get long, reading passes the time. Willow pulled out a well-worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and looked at him with new interest. This isn't just passing time, this is literature that challenges conventions. A slight smile tugged at his lips. Maybe I like being challenged. The moment stretched between them, a quiet recognition of depths neither had expected in the other. Luke broke it first, clearing his throat and gesturing to the bedroom. That's yours while you're here. I've got spare clothes of Sarah's in the trunk there. Kitchen's stocked, though I usually take meals with the men. He hesitated. I don't want you to feel trapped here, but it'd be safer if you stayed close to the house for now, at least until we know what Montgomery's planning. Willow nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. I don't know how to thank you. No need, Luke said simply. Rest up, we'll talk more at supper. Left alone, Willow explored the cabin more thoroughly. Despite its sparseness, it felt like a home, not a showpiece like the Montgomery mansion, but a place where someone actually lived. Photographs on the mantel caught her attention. Luke in a Confederate uniform, looking impossibly young. Luke with an older couple who must be his parents, and one of Luke with a pretty dark-haired woman and a small child. She was studying this last one when a sound at the door made her turn. Luke stood there, his expression unreadable as he saw what she was looking at. I'm sorry, she said quickly, setting the photograph down. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right. He crossed to the mantel and picked up the frame, looking at it with a mixture of tenderness and pain. My wife, Rebecca, and our son, Thomas, yellow fever took them both 6 years ago. I'm so sorry, Willow whispered, understanding now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his steady gaze. Luke carefully replaced the photograph. Life goes on, you either move with it or get left behind. He straightened his shoulders. I came to tell you I'm riding into town with Hank. Need to find out what Montgomery's up to without raising suspicions. Is that safe? Safe enough. I've got legitimate business with the feed store. He paused. Doc will be around if you need anything. He's a good man, Willow nodded, trying to hide her anxiety at being left alone so soon. Please be careful. Something in her voice made Luke look at her more closely. Montgomery doesn't know about my connection to you. Far as anyone knows, you could be halfway to Kansas by now. Still, she said, men like him are dangerous when crossed. I've faced worse, Luke replied with quiet confidence. We'll be back before dark. After Luke left, Willow tried to settle her nerves by exploring the property, always staying within sight of the main house as instructed. The ranch was peaceful, with only the sounds of livestock and the occasional call of a bird breaking the silence. She found herself drawn to a small vegetable garden behind the cabin, neglected but still producing squash and tomatoes among the weeds. She was kneeling in the dirt pulling weeds when Doc Phillips approached, carrying a basket of eggs. Found a new hobby, Miss Lancaster? He asked with a friendly smile. Willow sat back on her heels, embarrassed. I hope Mr. Blackwood doesn't mind. Gardening always helped me think. Mind. He'll be delighted. That garden was Rebecca's pride and joy. Luke keeps it planted but hasn't had the heart to tend it properly. Doc set down his basket and knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly nimble as he pulled a stubborn weed. You know, I've known Luke Blackwood for 5 years, and this is the first time he's brought a woman to the ranch since Rebecca died. Willow felt her cheeks warm. It's not like that, he's just helping me. Doc's eyes were kind behind his spectacles. Luke helps lots of folks. He doesn't usually bring them home. He pulled another weed. Whatever trouble you're in, and I can see it's significant you've found a good ally in him. Luke Blackwood is the most honorable man I know. I'm beginning to see that, Willow admitted. I just hope my presence doesn't bring him harm. Doc studied her thoughtfully. Montgomery's bride, aren't you? The one who ran off yesterday, Willow stiffened. How did you small territories have big gossip, and I still keep in touch with medical colleagues in town? He raised a hand at her alarmed expression. Don't worry. My loyalty is to Luke, not town gossip. Then you understand why I can't stay long. Montgomery won't stop looking. Doc nodded solemnly. Men like that rarely do, but don't underestimate Luke. He's got more resources than you might think. Before Willow could ask what he meant, Miguel approached, leading a beautiful Palomino mare. Señorita, the boss asked me to tell you Daisy here is yours to ride while you stay. She is gentle but swift if needed. Willow rose, wiping her hands on her borrowed skirt. She's beautiful. Please thank Mr. Blackwood for me. Miguel's dark eyes twinkled. Perhaps you can tell him yourself, Señorita. He and Hank are returning now. Willow turned to see 2 riders approaching from the distance, Luke's broad-shouldered silhouette unmistakable even from afar. Despite herself, she felt a flutter of relief at his return. Doc Phillips noticed and smiled to himself as he collected his egg basket. Interesting, he murmured, too quietly for Willow to hear. What none of them realized was that as Luke and Hank rode back to the ranch, they were already being watched by a pair of Montgomery's hired guns, who had followed them at a discreet distance from town men who would report back to their employer that Luke Blackwood might know more about the missing bride than he was letting on. The stage was set for a confrontation none of them were fully prepared to face. Luke's expression was grim as he dismounted, handing the reins to Miguel without his usual friendly word. Hank looked equally troubled, his weathered face set in lines of concern. What happened? Willow asked, meeting them by the corral fence, her heart racing at their demeanor. Luke's eyes scanned the property before settling on her. Inside, he said quietly, placing a gentle hand at the small of her back to guide her toward the cabin. Once the door closed behind them, Luke removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing in unruly spikes. Montgomery's offering $500 for information on your whereabouts. He's told everyone you were overcome with wedding nerves and wandered off in a state of confusion. Willow's hands clenched into fists. That's not, I know, Luke cut in, his voice softening. But it's a story that makes him look like the concerned groom rather than a man whose bride fled in terror. Hank, who had followed them inside, leaned against the doorframe. There's more, miss. He's got hired guns from Fort Worth asking questions, showing your picture around. These ain't local boys, they're professionals. Fear coiled in Willow's stomach. Because of me, you're all in danger now. No, Luke said firmly. Because of Montgomery's actions, we face a challenge. There's a difference. Willow wasn't convinced. I should leave, draw them away from here. And go where? Luke asked, his blue eyes intent on hers. Alone, with no money, no protection, I could head to Dallas, or even further. You wouldn't make it 10 miles before they caught you, Hank interjected bluntly. Luke shot his foreman a look, then gentled his voice. Willow, running isn't the answer. Not yet, anyway. We need a plan. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her pause. What kind of plan? Luke exchanged a glance with Hank, who nodded slightly. I've sent a telegram to an old war buddy who works for the territorial marshal now. Montgomery's railroad dealings have raised suspicions before, but no one's been willing to testify against him. Hope flickered in Willow's eyes. You think they'd listen to me? I think your testimony about his deliberate manipulation of your father's debts, combined with other evidence my friend has been gathering, could finally bring Montgomery to justice. Luke hesitated, but it'll take time for him to respond and travel here. Until then, we need to keep you safe. And if Montgomery's men come looking here, we'll be ready, Luke said simply. This ranch is easier to defend than you might think, and my men are loyal. Hank nodded in agreement. Boss saved my life during the war. I'd return the favor without question. The confidence in both men's voices was reassuring, but Willow still felt the weight of responsibility for the danger she'd brought to their door. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. Luke stepped closer, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Some things are worth fighting for, Willow. Some principles can't be compromised, no matter the cost. The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her, a recognition of the kind of man who stood before her. So different from Gilbert Montgomery with his calculated charm and hidden agendas. Luke Blackwood was exactly what he appeared to be, steadfast, honorable, and unwavering once his mind was set. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to him. "For everything." Something shifted in Luke's expression, a momentary softening that revealed more than perhaps he intended. But he stepped back, resuming his practical tone. "Hank, double the night watch starting today. Miguel and Doc need to know what we're facing." "Already told him, boss. They're with us." Luke nodded. "Good man." He turned back to Willow. "You should know everyone on this ranch now has a price on their head, same as you. Not officially, but Montgomery will retaliate against anyone who helps you." "And yet you're all still willing to stand with me," Willow said, humbled by their courage. "That's what folks do out here," Hank said with a shrug. "Stand together against threats, be they rustlers, elements, or corrupt businessmen." Luke picked up his hat, settling it back on his head. "I need to check the north pasture before dark. Hank, show Willow where we keep the rifles, just in case." "You're arming me?" Willow asked, surprised. A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. "Something tells me you're not the type to hide behind others when trouble comes. Am I wrong?" Willow thought of all she'd endured since her father's death, of the strength she'd found within herself when pushed to the brink. "No," she said firmly, "you're not wrong. Didn't think so." He headed for the door, then paused. "By the way, I noticed you working in the garden earlier. Feel free to do whatever you want with it. It could use a woman's touch again." The simple permission, so casually given, moved Willow more than grand gestures might have. It was an acknowledgement that while her stay might be temporary, she wasn't just a burden to be tolerated, she was welcome to leave her mark on this place, however small. As Luke left, Hank gave her a knowing look. "He doesn't let just anyone touch that garden, you know. Rebecca planted it their first spring here. It's special to him." "I'll take good care of it," Willow promised, understanding the trust Luke had just extended to her went beyond mere vegetables and flowers. What she didn't yet understand was how deeply Luke Blackwood was already coming to care for her, or how that care would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect late September day in the Texas territory. Willow woke early, having slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. The knowledge that Montgomery's men were actively searching for her kept her nerves on edge, and several times during the night, she'd started awake at ordinary ranch sounds, heart pounding. She dressed in the practical clothes. Sarah had provided a simple skirt and blouse that allowed for freedom of movement, and ventured outside. The ranch was already busy with morning activities. Miguel exercising the horses in the corral, Doc checking a calf with a limp, and Hank instructing a young boy Willow hadn't seen before about fixing a broken fence post. Luke emerged from the bunkhouse, freshly shaven but with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept no better than she had. When he spotted her, something in his expression lightened. "Morning," he called, crossing to meet her. "Coffee's brewing in the cookhouse if you're interested." "Thank you. I was hoping to work in the garden this morning if that's still all right," Luke nodded. "Of course, I've got some tools in the shed you can use." He hesitated. "We'll be heading to town around noon for Widow Parker's funeral. I think you should come with us." Willow stared at him in disbelief. "To town, where Montgomery's men are looking for me? Hear me out," Luke said, leading her toward the garden to speak privately. "The whole community will be at that funeral. Montgomery's too smart to make a scene in front of everyone, and his hired guns won't know you're with us if we're careful." "I don't understand. Why risk it?" Luke's expression was thoughtful. "Two reasons. First, staying hidden forever isn't practical. Eventually, we need to establish that you're under my protection openly, so Montgomery knows what he's dealing with. And the second reason, practical politics. The more people who see you as a person, not just Montgomery's runaway bride, the harder it will be for him to paint you as confused or unstable. Public opinion matters in small communities." Willow considered his logic. "You've thought this through." "I've been up most of the night thinking it through," Luke admitted. "It's a calculated risk, but I believe it's worth taking. You'll wear Sarah's Sunday clothes and a bonnet that shadows your face. We'll arrive just as the service begins and leave immediately after." The confidence in his plan was reassuring, but Willow still felt a flutter of anxiety. "And if something goes wrong," Luke's eyes were steady on hers. "Then we deal with it together. I won't let anyone take you against your will, Willow, not while I'm breathing." The simple, fierce promise sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "All right," she agreed. "I'll trust your judgment." Something like pleasure flickered across his face at her words. "Good." Now, about those garden tools, they were interrupted by the young boy Hank had been instructing, who came running up with an envelope in hand. "Mr. Blackwood, Ryder just delivered this from town, said it was urgent." Luke took the envelope, noting the official seal before opening it. His expression remained impassive as he read the contents, but Willow noticed a tightening around his eyes. "Everything all right?" she asked when the boy had left. Luke folded the paper carefully. "It's from Judge Wilson. Montgomery's filed a legal complaint claiming you're his wife by verbal contract and that I've interfered with his marital rights by harboring you." Willow gasped. "But we never completed the ceremony. The minister didn't pronounce us married." "Montgomery claims you exchanged private vows before the public ceremony. It's his word against yours." Luke's voice was grim. "The judge has ordered me to appear at the courthouse tomorrow to explain myself." "This is insane," Willow whispered. "He's lying. Of course he is. But he's a powerful man with influence over the local court." Luke tucked the paper into his shirt pocket. "This changes our plans somewhat. We'll still attend the funeral, but afterward, I'll need to meet with the lawyer in town. And you," he looked at her thoughtfully, "you'll need to decide if you're willing to stand up in court and publicly contradict Montgomery's claims." The enormity of what he was suggesting hit Willow full force. To publicly defy Gilbert Montgomery wasn't just dangerous, it could be fatal. No one had ever successfully challenged his power in Redemption Creek. But looking at Luke, who was risking everything to protect a woman he barely knew because it was the right thing to do, Willow found her resolve strengthening. "I'll do it," she said, her voice gaining confidence with each word. "I won't let him use lies to control me or to harm you." Luke studied her face for a long moment, as if taking the measure of her courage. Then he nodded, a new respect evident in his eyes. "Then we face this together." Neither spoke the obvious truth that hung between them, that by making this choice, they were setting themselves on a collision course with one of the most dangerous men in the territory, a man who had already proven he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And what Gilbert Montgomery wanted now, more than anything, was revenge on the woman who had humiliated him and the man who had helped her do it. The widow Parker's funeral drew nearly everyone from Redemption Creek and the surrounding homesteads. At Luke's insistence, they arrived just as the service was beginning, slipping into seats at the back of the church. Willow kept her head bowed, the bonnet hiding her features from casual observation, but she could feel curious glances directed their way. Luke sat beside her, a solid presence in his dark suit, with Hank on her other side. Doc and Miguel had stayed behind to guard the ranch, a precaution that now seemed increasingly necessary. The service was brief but heartfelt, with many speaking of the widow's kindness and strength after losing her husband in an Apache raid 10 years earlier. Willow found herself moved by the genuine affection evident in the eulogies. wondering if anyone would speak so fondly of her when her time came. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, Luke leaned close to whisper, "Montgomery's by the front left side. Don't look directly at him." Willow kept her gaze down, but from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Gilbert's imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in an expensive black suit. Even from this distance, she could feel his predatory attention scanning the crowd. "He's looking for me," she whispered back. "Let him look," Luke replied, his hand finding hers briefly, hidden in the folds of her skirt. "We'll be gone before he has a chance to approach." True to his word, the moment the service concluded, Luke guided her toward the side door while most of the congregation moved toward the main exit. They had almost reached the door when a voice called out, "Blackwood?" Luke tensed but kept moving, his hand at Willow's elbow urging her forward. "I know that's her with you, Blackwood," Montgomery's voice carried over the murmuring crowd, causing heads to turn. "You can't hide my wife forever," a collective gasp rippled through the church as people realized what was happening. Willow felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but Luke's grip remained steady, guiding her outside into the bright afternoon sun. "Keep walking," he murmured. "The horses are just around the corner." They had almost reached the hitching post when Montgomery emerged from the church, two hard-looking men flanking him. "Is this how a supposed gentleman behaves, Blackwood, stealing another man's wife and sneaking away like a thief?" Luke finally stopped, turning to face Montgomery while keeping Willow slightly behind him. The churchyard had gone silent, with people gathering to witness the confrontation. "Miss Lancaster isn't your wife, Montgomery. She made her choice clear when she left before saying any vows." Luke's voice was calm but carried easily to the onlookers. "And she's under my protection now," Montgomery's handsome face twisted with barely contained rage. A verbal contract was made, witnessed by her father before his unfortunate passing. The law recognizes such agreements. The law also recognizes a woman's right not to be forced into marriage through coercion and lies, Luke countered, his stance relaxed but alert, aware of the hired guns watching his every move. Willow stepped forward then, finding courage in Luke's steadfast presence. She raised her chin and pushed back her bonnet, letting everyone see her face clearly. "There was no verbal contract, Gilbert. You know that as well as I do. You're trying to use your influence to force what I was unwilling to give freely." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Most had heard only Montgomery's version of events, that his bride-to-be had suffered from nervous hysteria and wandered off. Seeing her clear-eyed and articulate challenged that narrative, Montgomery's facade of concern cracked momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Willow, darling, you're clearly still unwell. Come home with me and we'll get you the care you need." "I'm perfectly well," she replied, her voice carrying, "and I'm exactly where I choose to be." The public rejection delivered before the entire community was more than Montgomery's pride could bear. His face darkened. "You'll regret this defiance," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Both of you." Luke stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Montgomery and Willow. "Threats, Montgomery, in front of the whole town, not very clever." "It's not a threat, it's a promise." Montgomery straightened his already immaculate suit. "I'll see you in court tomorrow, Blackwood. Judge Wilson will sort out this unfortunate situation." He turned to the gathered crowd, his charm sliding back into place. "My apologies for disrupting Widow Parker's memorial. She deserved better respect." With that calculated show of dignity, he strode away, his men following closely behind. The damage, however, was already done. The community had witnessed Montgomery losing his composure, had heard Willow's clear denial of his claims, and had seen Luke Blackwood standing firm against a powerful adversary. As they mounted their horses to return to the ranch, Willow noticed several townspeople nodding respectfully in their direction. A few women even smiled at her encouragingly. "That went better than I expected," Luke said quietly as they rode away from town. Montgomery lost his temper, showed his true colors. "He'll be even more dangerous now," Willow replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "His pride won't allow him to back down after such a public confrontation," Luke's expression was solemn. I know, but neither will mine. The unspoken question hung between them as they rode home. What price were they both willing to pay for standing against Gilbert Montgomery? And would their newfound allies in town be enough to protect them from his wrath? The answer would come sooner than either of them expected, and in a form more violent than they had prepared for. They returned to the ranch in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the confrontation and what tomorrow's court appearance might bring. As they approached the main house, Doc Phillips emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "How was the service?" he asked, taking in their serious expressions. "Eventful," Luke replied, dismounting and helping Willow down from her horse. "Montgomery was there. He made a scene." Doc's eyebrows rose. "I take it our secret's out then?" "Completely," Willow confirmed. "He's claiming we were married by verbal contract before the ceremony and that Luke is harboring his legal wife." "Clever," Doc mused. "Even if it's eventually disproven, it gives him legal pretense to pursue you in the meantime." Luke handed the horse's reins to Miguel, who had joined them. "We're due in court tomorrow morning. Tonight we need to be especially vigilant. Montgomery's not the type to wait for legal proceedings if he sees another way to get what he wants." Miguel nodded gravely. "I will take first watch, Patron. The new rifles you ordered last month will serve us well if needed." Willow looked between the men, struck by how calmly they discussed the possibility of violence. This wasn't theoretical for them. They had all seen the darker side of frontier life and were prepared to face it again. "I should help," she said, straightening her shoulders. "You're all at risk because of me." Luke's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You can help by getting some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without you collapsing from exhaustion." Before she could argue, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a gallop. Everyone tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. "It's Hank," Doc said, recognizing the foreman's distinctive posture. "Riding hard." Hank had stayed behind in town after the funeral to gather information. The urgency of his return suggested he'd learned something important and likely troubling. He reined in his lathered horse sharply. "Boss, we've got problems. Big ones?" "Montgomery?" Luke asked, already knowing the answer, him and more. "He's called in favors from every direction. Got a dozen hired guns arriving on tonight's train from Fort Worth." Hank dismounted, his expression grim. "And he's convinced the sheriff to issue a warrant for your arrest, claims you assaulted him after the funeral." "What?" Willow exclaimed. "That never happened." "Everyone saw. Doesn't matter what people saw," Hank cut in. "Sheriff's in Montgomery's pocket, and so are enough witnesses to make the charge stick. They're planning to come for you tonight, boss, before the court hearing." Luke absorbed this news with remarkable composure. "They mean to make sure we never make it to court tomorrow." "That's my reading," Hank agreed. "With you in jail and Miss Lancaster rescued by her husband, Montgomery avoids any public testimony that might damage him." "We need to leave," Willow said urgently. "All of you." "I never meant for this to become so dangerous." Luke shook his head. "Running would only confirm his lies. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "this is my home. I don't abandon it to men like Montgomery." He turned to his men, his decision already made. "Hank, get the rifles distributed. Miguel, move the best horses to the North Corral. They'll be safer there if things go badly. Doc, I need you to prepare for possible injuries." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Luke guided Willow toward the house, his hand gentle but firm at her elbow. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Privately, inside, he closed the door and faced her directly, his blue eyes intense. "This is the moment where you need to decide, Willow, really decide, because after tonight there's no going back for either of us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that standing against Montgomery like this, defying his warrants, refusing his claims on you, makes us outlaws in the eyes of corrupted law, at least temporarily." Luke's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I'm prepared for that. My question is, are you?" Willow felt the weight of his question, not just about tonight's potential violence, but about a future forever altered by the choices they were making. "If I surrender to him now, would he leave you and your men alone?" Luke's expression hardened. "Don't even consider it." Montgomery would make an example of me regardless, to ensure no one else ever dares help someone against him. And you, his voice caught slightly, you know what your life would be with him. The thought of returning to Gilbert's control, of enduring his ownership and inevitable cruelty, made Willow physically ill. But the alternative meant becoming the cause of bloodshed, perhaps even deaths. Luke seemed to read her thoughts. This isn't just about you anymore, Willow. It's about drawing a line against men who think their money and influence put them above decency and law. My men understand that. They're staying by choice. Willow studied his face, the determination in his jaw, the unwavering conviction in his eyes, and realized something profound. Luke Blackwood would have stood against Gilbert Montgomery eventually, even without her involvement. It was written in his character, this refusal to bow before corrupt power. I won't run, she said finally, and I won't surrender. Whatever comes, we face it together. Relief and something deeper flickered in Luke's eyes. He reached out, his calloused hand cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. Then we'd better prepare. It's going to be a long night. The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through Willow's body, a stark contrast to the fear that had gripped her moments before. Without thinking, she leaned into his palm, taking comfort in the connection. Luke's breath caught, his eyes darkening as they dropped to her lips. For a heartbeat, Willow thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, she realized with sudden clarity. Instead, he slowly withdrew his hand, regret and resolve warring in his expression. Not now, he said softly. Not with what's coming. You deserve better than a moment stolen in fear. The consideration behind his restraint moved Willow deeply. This was a man who thought of her well-being even when facing mortal danger, so unlike Gilbert, who had only ever thought of his own desires. Luke, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only knowing she needed to express the feelings taking root in her heart. A sharp knock interrupted them. Boss, Hank called through the door. Riders spotted coming from town, at least 8, moving fast. The moment shattered. Luke straightened, his expression shifting to focused determination. Earlier than expected, they're not waiting for dark. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Stay inside, away from the windows. If shooting starts, I know how to use a gun, Willow interrupted, surprising him. My father taught me I'm not hiding while you all risk your lives. Luke stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Second rifle's in the bedroom, but Willow, his eyes held hers intently. Whatever happens, stay alive, that's what matters most. With those words, he was gone, striding out to meet the approaching threat, leaving Willow to wonder at the depth of feeling behind his parting command. What neither of them could have anticipated was how the events of the coming hours would transform not just their lives, but the future of Redemption Creek itself. The ranch hands had positioned themselves strategically around the property, Hank and Miguel behind the corral fence with clear sightlines to the approaching road, Doc in the hayloft of the barn with a rifle and medical supplies, and Luke on the porch of the main house, seemingly casual but alert to every movement. Willow watched from just inside the doorway, rifle ready, her heart hammering against her ribs as the riders approached. Despite the distance, she could make out Sheriff Daniels at the front, his silver star catching the late afternoon sun. Beside him rode 2 of Montgomery's men from the funeral, and behind them, 5 rough-looking strangers with the unmistakable bearing of hired guns. That's far enough, Sheriff, Luke called out when the riders were within earshot. His voice carried easily across the yard, calm but authoritative. State your business. The sheriff reined in his horse, looking uncomfortable but determined. Luke Blackwood, I've got a warrant for your arrest on charges of assault and the abduction of Gilbert Montgomery's legal wife. That's a lie and you know it, Tom, Luke replied, using the sheriff's first name deliberately, reminding him of their long acquaintance. No assault occurred and Miss Lancaster isn't married to anyone, least of all Montgomery. Sheriff Daniels shifted in his saddle. That's for the judge to decide. I'm just doing my job, Luke. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. And these men, Luke gestured to the strangers. Since when does the sheriff need hired guns to serve a warrant? Mr. Montgomery has deputized them temporarily, given the circumstances. A humorless smile crossed Luke's face. Convenient, and if I refuse to surrender to this legal posse, one of Montgomery's men spat on the ground. Then we take you by force, Blackwood, and find the woman ourselves. Luke's posture changed subtly, a coiled readiness replacing his apparent relaxation. I don't think you understand the situation, gentlemen. This is private property. You have no legal right to search my ranch without proper cause, especially with questionable deputies. The warrant, the sheriff began, is for my arrest on trumped-up charges, Luke finished. It doesn't authorize a search for Miss Lancaster, who is a free adult woman making her own choices. He stepped forward, his voice hardening. Now, I suggest you all turn around and head back to town. Tell Montgomery if he wants to settle this, we'll be in court tomorrow morning as ordered. For a moment, it seemed the sheriff might actually consider the reasonable suggestion. Then one of the hired guns, a lean, scarred man with cold eyes, nudged his horse forward. Enough talk. We were paid for a job, not a debate. He drew his pistol with practiced speed. Blackwood, you're coming with us, and the woman too. Anyone who interferes gets a bullet. The atmosphere shifted instantly from tense to deadly. Hank and Miguel rose from their positions, rifles aimed, making the hired guns aware they were covered from multiple angles. Lower that gun, Luke ordered, his own weapon now raised. You fire a single shot on my property and none of you will ride out of here. The standoff crackled with lethal potential, each man measuring the others, calculating odds and angles. Willow watched in horror, knowing the slightest wrong move could trigger a bloodbath. It was the sheriff who broke the stalemate, raising his hands placatingly. Everyone calm down. There's no need for violence. He turned to the hired gun. Put that away, Reynolds. This isn't how we do things. It's exactly how Montgomery wants it done, Reynolds retorted, but he lowered his pistol slightly. The sheriff looked genuinely torn, a man caught between duty and the corrupting influence that had overtaken his town. Luke, I've known you 15 years. You've always been a decent man. If you say this woman isn't being held against her will, why don't you ask her yourself? Luke suggested, seizing the opening. Willow took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch beside Luke, rifle held confidently but not aimed. Sheriff Daniels, I'm Willow Lancaster. I'm here by choice, seeking protection from Gilbert Montgomery's threats and coercion. I was never married to him by verbal contract or otherwise. The sheriff studied her closely. Miss, are you aware that Mr. Montgomery claims you're experiencing some mental confusion following your father's death, that you need medical attention? Willow's spine stiffened. I'm perfectly sound of mind, Sheriff. Gilbert Montgomery is attempting to control me because I refused to marry him after discovering his role in my father's financial ruin and subsequent suicide. She met his gaze directly. Would a confused woman speak so clearly? Would she remember the specific clauses in the loan documents that Montgomery's bank manipulated to force my father into bankruptcy? Her precise words and steady demeanor clearly gave the sheriff pause. He glanced at the hired guns, then back at Luke and Willow, internal conflict evident on his weathered face. The law is supposed to protect the innocent, Tom, Luke said quietly, not serve the powerful at their expense. Something in the sheriff seemed to resolve itself. He straightened in his saddle. I believe I need to reconsider the validity of these charges. We'll return to town, and the hell we will. Reynolds snarled, raising his gun again, this time aiming directly at Luke. Montgomery paid good money for results. Everything happened in a blur, Reynolds' finger tightening on the trigger, Luke shoving Willow toward the doorway, the crack of gunfire from multiple directions at once. Willow fell hard against the porch boards as bullets splintered wood around her. Then Luke was beside her, pulling her through the doorway to safety, his expression intense but controlled. Stay down, he ordered, returning to the doorway to fire back at the attackers who had scattered to find cover. Outside, chaos had erupted. The sheriff was shouting for a ceasefire, but his voice was drowned out by continuing gunshots. Hank called out that Miguel had been hit, and Doc's rifle cracked steadily from the barn loft. This is my fault, Willow whispered, horrified by the violence unleashed because of her. Luke glanced back at her, his eyes fierce. No, this is Montgomery's doing, and it ends today one way or another. The determination in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it kindled an answering resolve in Willow's heart. Whatever happened, they would face it together not as victim and protector, but as equals standing against injustice. Neither could have predicted how the next hours would transform not just their relationship, but the very power structure of Redemption Creek itself, or how their stand against corruption would ripple outward, changing lives far beyond their own. The gunfight raged for what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes of intense, calculated violence. Luke moved between windows with the practiced efficiency of a man who had seen combat, each shot deliberate and precise. Hank's voice occasionally called updates from the corral, and Doc's rifle continued its steady rhythm from the barn. Willow remained by the front window, firing only when she had a clear shot, determined not to be a passive observer in this fight that was, at its core, about her freedom. A bullet grazed her arm at one point, tearing her sleeve and leaving a burning line across her skin, but she barely registered the pain. Gradually, the shooting from the attackers became less coordinated, more sporadic. One of the hired guns lay motionless in the yard, another was clutching a bleeding shoulder behind an overturned water trough, and the rest had retreated to the distant tree line. "They're pulling back," Luke announced, quickly reloading his rifle. "Sheriff's with them looks like he's injured but moving under his own power." "Is it over?" Willow asked, not daring to believe it could end so simply. Luke shook his head grimly. "Just a temporary retreat. They'll regroup, maybe wait for dark." He moved to the door, calling out to his men. "Hank." "Status?" Miguel took one in the leg, Hank shouted back. "Doc's with him now. We're holding boss." Luke turned to Willow, really seeing her for the first time since the shooting started. His eyes widened as he noticed the blood on her sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing, barely a scratch." She brushed off his concern, though the warmth in his eyes made her pulse quicken despite the danger. He crossed to her anyway, gently examining the wound. "Could have been much worse," he murmured, relief evident in his voice. "You handled yourself well out there." Not many women or men, for that matter, could keep their composure in a firefight. "I had a good example to follow," she replied, suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the smell of gunpowder and leather that clung to him. Luke's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through danger and shared purpose. For a moment, the gunfire and threats seemed distant, overshadowed by this new understanding. The moment shattered when Doc burst through the door, his spectacles askew and blood staining his hands. "Luke, riders coming from the east, at least a dozen," Luke cursed, moving to the window. "Montgomery's reinforcements, earlier than I expected." He turned back, his expression hardening into resolve. "We're outnumbered now. Doc, is Miguel stable enough to move?" "Barely, but yes, the bullet went clean through." Luke nodded, decision made. "Then we're leaving. We can't hold the ranch against those numbers." "Leaving." Willow echoed, stunned by the abrupt change in strategy. "But your home is just land and lumber," Luke finished firmly. "Lives matter more. Montgomery wants a war, fine, but we'll fight it on our terms, not his." His decisive leadership galvanized them into action. Within minutes, they had gathered essential supplies, ammunition, food, medical necessities for Miguel, and warm clothing against the approaching night. "Where will we go?" Willow asked as she helped Luke pack saddlebags with jerky and hardtack. "North, into the hill country. I've got a hunting cabin there that few know about." Luke secured the provisions and handed her a canteen. "It's defensible, remote, and has a spring nearby. We can hold out there until my friend from the marshal's office arrives." The plan made sense, but Willow couldn't help feeling that she was watching Luke sacrifice everything he'd built because of her. "I'm sorry about your ranch," she said quietly. Luke paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. "Willow, listen to me. A ranch can be rebuilt. Cattle can be replaced, but what we're fighting for here, justice, truth, the right to live free from men like Montgomery, that's worth any price." His eyes held hers intently. "I need to know you understand that you don't carry guilt for choices I'm making willingly." The conviction in his voice, the unwavering certainty in his gaze, made something shift inside Willow, a realization that Luke Blackwood wasn't just protecting her out of duty or principle. There was something deeper growing between them, something neither had expected but both now recognized. "I understand," she said softly, reaching out to touch his arm, "and I'm with you whatever comes next." The corner of his mouth lifted in a smile that transformed his serious face. "Then let's ride. We've got a long night ahead." They slipped out the back of the property as dusk settled across the land, a small caravan of 5 riders moving silently into the gathering darkness. Miguel rode double with Doc, his face pale with pain but determined. Hank led the way, his knowledge of the back trails invaluable as they avoided the main roads where Montgomery's men might be watching. Behind them, the ranch stood empty and vulnerable, likely to be ransacked or burned before morning. Yet as Willow glanced back at the silhouette of the cabin where she had found unexpected sanctuary, she felt not defeat but a strange sense of liberation. For the first time since her father's death, she was actively choosing her path rather than reacting to circumstances forced upon her. And despite the danger, despite the uncertain future, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: the path she wanted led wherever Luke Blackwood was going. What neither of them realized was that their flight from the ranch was being observed not just by Montgomery's men, but by another party altogether, one whose intervention would soon change the course of the conflict in ways no one could have anticipated. The journey to Luke's hunting cabin was arduous, especially for Miguel with his wounded leg. They rode through the night, taking infrequent breaks to rest the horses and check on Miguel's condition. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they entered the hill country, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid leaving obvious tracks. Willow had never experienced such physical challenges, but she refused to complain. Every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she would catch Luke watching her with quiet concern, and she would straighten in the saddle, determined not to be the weak link. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the cabin, a sturdy one-room structure nestled against a limestone bluff, partially hidden by oak and cedar trees. A small spring bubbled nearby, and the elevated position offered clear views of the surrounding approaches. "It's not much," Luke said as he helped Willow dismount, her legs so stiff she nearly collapsed against him. "But it's defensible." "It's perfect," she replied, meaning it. After the night they'd endured, any shelter seemed luxurious. Doc and Hank carefully helped Miguel inside while Luke secured the horses in a natural corral formed by the limestone outcropping. Willow followed them into the cabin, finding it sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center, and several bedrolls were stacked in the corner. "Used to bring Thomas here," Luke explained when he entered, catching her examining a child-sized fishing pole mounted on the wall. "Teaching him to fish, hunt. Rebecca would come sometimes, bring books to read while we men played at wilderness survival." His voice held a wistful quality, memories both precious and painful. Willow touched the small pole gently. "He must have loved it here." "He did." Luke's expression softened. 6 years old and fearless, would have grown into a fine man given the chance. The simple statement, the quiet acceptance of a loss that must have nearly destroyed him, made Willow's heart ache. This was the kind of strength that defined Luke Blackwood, not just physical courage or tactical skill, but the ability to endure profound pain and still remain open to life's possibilities. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Doc calling for help with Miguel. The young vaquero's wound needed cleaning and fresh bandaging after the long ride. While the men tended to him, Willow took stock of their supplies and began preparing a simple meal from the provisions they'd brought. By mid-morning, they had established a tentative routine. Miguel rested on one of the bedrolls, his fever concerning but not yet dangerous. Hank took the first watch from a position overlooking the trail they'd followed. Doc inventoried their medical supplies, and Luke checked and cleaned every weapon they possessed. Willow brought Luke a cup of coffee, sitting beside him as he worked. "How long do you think we can stay here?" He considered the question carefully. Food and water won't be a problem. Ammunition is limited, but we can make it last if we're careful. The real question is how long until Montgomery finds us. He sipped the coffee, grimacing at its bitterness. My friend in the marshal's office should reach Redemption Creek within 3 days, assuming my telegram reached him. And if it didn't, Luke met her eyes directly, then we adapt. Maybe head further north, cross into Indian territory if necessary. The mention of such a drastic step, becoming genuine fugitives, made the reality of their situation hit home for Willow. I never imagined my life would take such a turn, she said quietly. A week ago, I was preparing to marry a man I thought respected me, trying to honor my father's memory by securing our family's future. And now? Luke asked, his voice gentle. Willow looked around at the rustic cabin, at the men who had risked everything to help a woman they barely knew, at Luke himself, steady, honorable, increasingly important to her in ways she was just beginning to understand. Now I'm learning what true respect looks like, she said softly. What it means to be valued for more than my family name or my usefulness to someone's ambitions. Something flickered in Luke's eyes, a warmth, a recognition. He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're an extraordinary woman, Willow Lancaster. Your father would be proud of the courage you've shown. The tenderness of the gesture, coupled with words that touched a place of deep grief within her, brought unexpected tears to Willow's eyes. I hope so, she whispered. I miss him every day. Luke's hand lingered near her face, his calloused thumb gently brushing away a tear that escaped down her cheek. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings that had grown from seeds of respect into something far more complex. Luke, Hank's urgent voice broke the spell. Riders coming up the south trail, at least 4, moving slow like they're tracking. They moved to the window, Luke's arm instinctively protective around Willow's shoulders. Through the trees, they could make out mounted figures picking their way along the trail they had followed hours earlier. Montgomery's men? Willow asked, her heart sinking at how quickly they had been found. Luke studied the distant riders, his expression changing from concern to confusion. No, he said slowly, those are Comanche. The revelation sent a chill through the cabin. The Comanche were largely peaceful in this region now, with most having been relocated to reservations years earlier, but isolated bands still roamed the hill country, and encounters could be unpredictable at best. What would bring them here? Doc wondered, joining them at the window. Luke's brow furrowed in concentration. They're following our trail deliberately, not a hunting party. He turned to Hank. Any sign they're hostile? No weapons drawn, boss. Riding casual-like, Luke made a swift decision. I'm going out to meet them. If they wanted an attack, they wouldn't approach so openly. Luke, no. Willow grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous. He covered her hand with his own. I've dealt with the Comanche before. There's protocol, respect to be shown. Hiding in here would be seen as weakness or guilt. His eyes held her steadily. Trust me, Willow, this might be a complication, or it might be the help we desperately need. She wanted to argue further, but recognized the certainty in his expression. This was his territory, his expertise. Be careful, she said instead, reluctantly releasing his arm. Luke nodded, checking his pistol before heading to the door. Hank, cover me from the window. Doc, keep everyone else inside no matter what happens. He stepped out into the clearing before the cabin, standing tall and visible, his empty hands held slightly away from his body in the universal sign of peaceful intent. The Comanche riders spotted him immediately, conferring briefly before continuing their approach at the same measured pace. Willow watched anxiously from the window, her heart in her throat as the distance between Luke and the riders decreased. She could now see that the lead rider was an older man with a deeply lined face and gray streaks in his long black hair. He wore a mixture of traditional clothing and items clearly obtained through trade with whites. When they were about 20 yards apart, the Comanche riders stopped. The older man raised his hand in greeting, speaking words Willow couldn't hear. To her surprise, Luke responded in what appeared to be the Comanche language, halting but respectful. The exchange continued for several minutes, with occasional gestures toward the cabin and then back in the direction of Redemption Creek. The tension in Luke's posture gradually eased, and eventually he turned toward the cabin and motioned for those inside to come out. "It's safe," he called. "They're friends, or at least not enemies." Doc and Willow emerged cautiously while Hank remained at the window, rifle ready just in case. Luke beckoned Willow forward to stand beside him. "This is Chief Quanah," he explained. "He says his scouts have been watching Montgomery's men searching the hills since dawn. They've seen what's happening, a powerful man hunting a woman who refused him." Willow looked at the Comanche leader with new understanding. Quanah studied her in return, his dark eyes missing nothing. "The woman has spirit," he said in accented but clear English, surprising Willow. "She stands straight, meets my eyes, good." He turned back to Luke. "We have no love for Montgomery. His men killed 2 of our hunters last winter, claimed they were stealing cattle. No justice was given." Luke nodded grimly. "That sounds like Montgomery. Now he sends many armed men into our hunting grounds, disrupting game, making trouble." Quanah's expression hardened. "This is not acceptable. We're trying to avoid bloodshed," Luke explained. "Just need to hold out until the federal marshal arrives to investigate Montgomery's crimes." Quanah considered this information, then made a decision. "The cabin is too obvious. They will find you by nightfall." He gestured to the limestone bluffs rising behind them. "We have a camp 2 hours' ride from here in a hidden valley. Your wounded man can rest there. Montgomery's men will not follow into our territory." The offer of sanctuary was unexpected and potentially life-saving. Luke looked to Willow, including her in the decision. "It's your call. This changes our plans considerably." Willow studied Quanah, sensing no deception in his direct gaze. If anything, she recognized in him a similar quality to what had drawn her to trust Luke, a fundamental integrity that transcended cultural differences. "Thank you for your offer, Chief Quanah," she said, stepping forward and addressing him directly. "We accept with gratitude." A hint of approval flickered across the chief's weathered features. He nodded once, then turned his horse. "Gather your people and supplies quickly. We must move before the white hunters find your trail." As they hurried to prepare for this unexpected development, Willow caught Luke watching her with something like wonder in his eyes. "What?" she asked self-consciously. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. Most women raised in town would be terrified at the prospect of seeking refuge with the Comanche. Willow thought about the past week, her near suicide, the confrontation with Montgomery, the gunfight at the ranch, and now this alliance with a people she had been taught to fear. Life had carried her far beyond the boundaries of what she once considered possible. "Perhaps I'm not the woman I thought I was," she replied. "Perhaps I'm becoming someone new, someone stronger." Luke's smile was warm with admiration. "Not becoming," Willow, revealing. "This strength was always in you, waiting for the right moment to emerge." His words settled in her heart like a blessing, an affirmation of something she was just beginning to believe about herself. And as they prepared to follow Chief Quanah into yet another unexpected chapter of their journey, Willow realized that whatever the outcome of their conflict with Montgomery, she would never again be the desperate woman who had waded into the river seeking oblivion. That woman was gone, washed away by the current, and replaced by someone who had discovered her own worth, someone who had found, in the most unlikely circumstances, not just protection but the possibility of love. The Comanche camp was unlike anything Willow had imagined. Nestled in a hidden valley protected by towering limestone cliffs, it consisted of about 15 teepees arranged in a semicircle, with a central fire pit where several women were preparing food. Children played among the dwellings, stopping to stare curiously as the strangers rode in, escorted by Chief Quanah and his warriors. Miguel was immediately taken to a large teepee where an elderly woman waited, her face deeply creased with age but her eyes sharp and knowing. "Medicine woman," Luke explained quietly to Willow. "Their healing knowledge is remarkable." The reception from the rest of the camp was cautious but not hostile. Chief Quanah spoke to his people in their language, explaining the situation. And Willow could see the attitudes shift as they understood that these white strangers were also enemies of Montgomery. "You and your men will stay there," Quanah instructed Luke, pointing to a teepee near the edge of the camp. "The woman will stay with my sister's family." He gestured to a middle-aged woman who stepped forward with dignified grace. "Little Dove will see to your needs." Willow glanced at Luke, momentarily anxious about being separated. He nodded reassuringly. "It's their way, shows respect for you as a woman to be housed with the women of the tribe." Little Dove approached Willow with a kind smile. "Come," she said in halting English, "you are safe here." The next few hours were a revelation for Willow. Little Dove's teepee was clean and orderly, with beautifully tanned hides forming the floor covering and intricately beaded items hanging from the supporting poles. Her two teenage daughters watched Willow with unconcealed curiosity, giggling behind their hands when she struggled to sit comfortably on the ground. Little Dove brought her a bowl of stew rich with game meat and unfamiliar roots that Willow found surprisingly delicious. As they ate, the language barrier gradually lessened, with the daughters knowing enough English to translate their mother's questions. "She asks why the white man hunts you," the older girl explained. Willow considered how to explain concepts like arranged marriage and financial coercion across such different cultural understandings. "He wanted me to be his wife. I refused. Where I come from, powerful men are not used to hearing no from women." When this was translated, Little Dove nodded with immediate comprehension. Some experiences, Willow realized, transcended cultural differences. The struggle of women against men who sought to control them was universal. "And the other man?" the younger daughter asked shyly. "The tall one with kind eyes, is he your husband?" Willow felt her cheeks warm. "No, Luke saved my life when I was in despair. He's been protecting me since." Little Dove smiled knowingly when this was translated. "She says his eyes follow you like a wolf watches his mate. He may not be your husband, but his heart has chosen." The observation, so directly stated, sent a flutter through Willow's chest. Had Luke's feelings grown as hers had? She had sensed something developing between them, moments of connection that went beyond their circumstances, but neither had spoken of it directly. "It's complicated," she said finally, not knowing how else to explain. Little Dove patted her hand with maternal understanding. "Life always is." As evening fell, the camp gathered around the central fire for a shared meal. Luke joined Willow, sitting close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, sending sparks of awareness through her despite their public setting. "Miguel's doing better," he reported. "The medicine woman used some kind of poultice that's drawn out the infection. Doc's impressed, says he wants to learn the technique before we leave." "When will that be?" Willow asked quietly. Luke's expression grew serious. "Chief Quanah's scouts report Montgomery's men are still searching the hills, but they're staying clear of Comanche territory. We're safe here for now." He hesitated. "But we can't stay indefinitely. This puts the tribe at risk if Montgomery discovers they're sheltering us. So what's our plan?" "Quanah has offered to send 2 of his best warriors to Redemption Creek tomorrow. They can move undetected where we couldn't, bring back news of what's happening, maybe even check if my telegram received any response." Luke's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "We wait, gather information, and prepare for whatever comes next." The simple contact of his hand holding hers felt more intimate than anything Willow had experienced before. In the firelight, with the rhythmic chanting of Comanche songs filling the air, the world beyond this hidden valley seemed distant and unreal. "Luke," she said softly, turning to face him more directly. "If we survive this, if we somehow find justice against Montgomery, what happens then?" His eyes reflected the dancing flames as he studied her face. "What do you want to happen, Willow?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. A week ago, she had been preparing to marry a man she respected but didn't love, accepting the practical arrangement as her duty. Now, sitting beside a man who had shown her what true respect and caring looked like, her heart yearned for something she had never thought possible. "I want," she began, then faltered, courage deserting her. Luke waited patiently, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," he encouraged softly. Before she could continue, Chief Quanah approached, his expression grave. "Blackwood," he said without preamble, "one of my scouts has returned. A large party of armed white men has entered the Eastern Valley, led by a man matching Montgomery's description." Luke was on his feet instantly, his hand reluctantly releasing Willow's. "How many?" "20, perhaps more. They have torches, wagons with supplies." Quanah's eyes were hard in the firelight. "They are not just searching, they are hunting, prepared for a siege." The news sent a chill through Willow. Montgomery was committing significant resources to find them more than would be justified for a simple personal grudge or wounded pride. "He's desperate," she realized aloud. "There must be more at stake than just me." Luke nodded grimly. "The railroad deal you mentioned. If your testimony could expose corruption involving the territorial government, he stands to lose much more than a bride." Chief Quanah looked between them. "My people will not attack white men unprovoked, but neither will we surrender guests who have come in peace." He straightened to his full height. "We will move camp before dawn, deeper into the canyon lands where even Comanche enemies have failed to find us." The decision was both generous and strategic, protecting his tribe while honoring the alliance they had formed. Luke clasped the chief's arm in gratitude. "We are in your debt, Quanah. No debt between warriors who share enemies," Quanah replied simply. He looked at Willow, his expression softening slightly. "The woman has brought trouble, but also opportunity. Montgomery has long been an enemy to my people. Perhaps the spirits have sent you to help us be rid of him at last." After Quanah left to organize the camp's relocation, Willow turned to Luke, fear and determination warring within her. 20 armed men, Luke. How can we possibly stand against such force?" Instead of the concern she expected, Luke's face held a strange calmness, almost a relief. "Don't you see, Willow, Montgomery's showing his hand. No legitimate businessman commits such resources to reclaiming a runaway bride. His actions prove he's desperate to silence you." "And that helps us how?" "Because desperate men make mistakes," Luke replied, his eyes alight with strategy. "And because his very excess gives us leverage with the authorities. No marshal can ignore a private army operating in his territory." Willow wanted to share his optimism, but the reality of their situation remained daunting. "Even if the marshal comes, we still have to survive until then." Luke's expression softened as he saw the fear she was trying to hide. He stepped closer, his hands gently framing her face. "Willow Lancaster, I made you a promise by that river, not in words, perhaps, but in my heart. When I said not today to your death, I meant not any day, not while I draw breath." The intensity in his voice, the conviction in his eyes, made her breath catch. Luke, whatever she might have said, was lost as his lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened with the urgency of feelings too long contained. Willow's arms wound around his neck as she responded with all the emotion that had been building since he pulled her from the river: gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, warmer, that she now recognized as love. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first night you spent at my ranch," he admitted roughly, "but I needed you to know it wasn't about rescue or obligation. What I feel for you, Willow, it's about who you are, not the circumstances that brought us together." Willow's heart soared at his words, at the realization that her feelings were not just reciprocated, but had been growing alongside her own. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you refused to let me die," she whispered. "Not because you saved me, but because you saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." The vulnerability in her admission made Luke pull her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. "Whatever happens with Montgomery, with the marshal, with any of it, know that my heart is yours, Willow. If we survive this, I want a chance to build a life with you. Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I believe we could create something beautiful together." It was a proposal of sorts, spoken in the heart of a Comanche camp with danger closing in around them, unconventional, unexpected, and perfectly right for the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Yes," Willow said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As they stood embracing under the star-filled Texas sky, the camp bustling with preparation around them, neither could know exactly what challenges the coming days would bring. But one thing had been transformed irrevocably. They were no longer just allies against a common enemy, but partners whose hearts had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. And that bond, forged in danger and deepened by genuine understanding, would prove to be their greatest strength in the battle that lay ahead. Dawn found the Comanche camp dismantled with practiced efficiency, leaving barely a trace of their presence in the valley. The tribe moved with the silent discipline of people accustomed to quick relocations, the children carrying small bundles, the women managing household goods, the warriors scouting ahead and behind to ensure safe passage. Willow rode beside Luke, their newfound closeness evident in the way they naturally gravitated toward each other. Miguel was strong enough to ride his own horse now, though Doc stayed close to monitor his condition. Hank scouted alongside the Comanche warriors, his frontier skills earning their respect. The new campsite was even more secluded than the first, a box canyon accessible only through a narrow passage that could be easily defended. A spring bubbled from the rock wall, providing fresh water, and ancient pictographs decorated the canyon walls, evidence that this had been a place of refuge for centuries. "My grandfather's grandfather came here when Apache raiders threatened our people," Chief Quanah explained as they set up the new camp. "No enemy has ever found this place who was not led here deliberately." Luke surveyed the defensible position with approval. "It's perfect. Montgomery could have 100 men and still not force his way through that passage if it's properly guarded." While the Comanche rebuilt their temporary homes, Luke gathered his people to discuss their situation. They sat in a circle near the spring, voices kept low though they were well out of earshot of the rest of the camp. "We need to consider all possibilities," Luke began. "Best case scenario, the marshal received my telegram and is already in Redemption Creek, investigating Montgomery's activities." "And worst case?" Doc asked, cleaning his spectacles thoughtfully. "Worst case, the telegram never arrived and we're on our own against Montgomery's private army." Luke's expression remained calm despite the gravity of his words. "We can't stay with the Comanche indefinitely. Eventually, we'll need to make a move." Willow, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. "What if we created a diversion, something to draw Montgomery's forces away from the tribe, give us a chance to reach the territorial capital directly?" Luke considered her suggestion. "Risky, but not without merit. The problem is distance. It's a 4-day ride to the capital, and we'd be exposed the entire way." "Unless we split up," Hank suggested. "Some of us create the diversion, others escort Miss Lancaster to the authorities." "No," Luke and Willow said simultaneously, their eyes meeting in shared resolve. Luke cleared his throat. "We stay together. Our strength is in unity." "Perhaps there's another option," Miguel said quietly, speaking up for the first time since his injury. "My cousin works for the telegraph office in Mesa Junction, 30 miles east. If we could get a message to him, he could verify whether the marshal received the original telegram and send a new one if needed." Hope flickered in Luke's eyes. "Mesa Junction is smaller, less likely to have Montgomery's influence. It could work." He turned to Willow. "What do you think?" The fact that he asked her opinion rather than simply making the decision touched Willow deeply. It was yet another reminder of how different he was from Montgomery, who had never valued her thoughts on any matter of importance. "I think it's our best option," she agreed, "but who would go? The journey would be dangerous for any of us." "I'll speak with Chief Quanah," Luke decided. "Perhaps one of his warriors could carry the message. They can move through this territory undetected better than any of us." The plan was set in motion immediately. Chief Quanah readily agreed to send 2 of his best young warriors to Mesa Junction, carrying a written message from Luke to Miguel's cousin. They would travel by night, avoid roads, and return as quickly as possible. 3 days, Quanah estimated. Maybe 4 if Montgomery's men are watching the eastern trails. While they waited, life in the hidden canyon developed its own rhythm. Willow spent much of her time with Little Dove and the other women, learning their crafts and helping with daily tasks. They taught her to identify edible plants, to weave baskets from reeds found along the spring, and to prepare hides for tanning. In return, she shared what she knew of reading and writing, using a stick to draw letters in the dirt for the curious children. Luke divided his time between strategic planning with Quanah's warriors and working alongside the Comanche men hunting and maintaining the camp's defenses. Each evening, he and Willow would find time alone, walking along the canyon rim as sunset painted the limestone walls in shades of gold and crimson. It was during one such evening, 3 days after the messengers had left, that Luke finally shared the full story of his wife and son's deaths, not just the bare facts he had mentioned before, but the emotional devastation that had followed. "I was away when the fever hit," he said, his voice low as they sat watching the stars appear above the canyon. "Driving cattle to market in San Antonio. By the time I got the news and rode back, they were already gone. Thomas first, then Rebecca the next day." Willow took his hand, offering silent support as he continued. "The hardest part wasn't even their deaths. It was that I wasn't there." His voice caught slightly. "Rebecca faced it alone, watching our sons slip away, then feeling the same fever take hold of her. I promised to protect them, and when they needed me most, I was chasing profit 200 miles away." "You couldn't have known," Willow said gently. "No, but that didn't ease the guilt." Luke stared into the distance. "For 3 years after, I barely spoke to anyone. Just worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, fell into bed exhausted, then did it all again the next day. Drove myself harder than any man should, hoping physical pain would drown out what I felt inside." Willow could picture it all too clearly, this strong, honorable man trying to outrun grief through sheer force of will. "What changed?" she asked softly. A small smile touched his lips. "Doc Phillips, believe it or not. Showed up at my ranch one day, said he was tired of city medicine and wanted to learn ranching. Never asked about my past, never pushed me to talk, just worked alongside me, started bringing books to read in the evenings. He sounds like a good friend, the best. Gradually brought me back to the land of the living." Luke turned to look at her directly, his eyes reflecting the first evening stars. "But it wasn't until I saw you in that river that I felt truly alive again. Watching you fight to stay afloat, even as you thought you wanted to die, it woke something in me I thought was gone forever." Willow leaned against his shoulder, understanding now why he had been so determined to save her that day. In a way, he had been saving himself as well. "We healed each other then." Luke's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. "I think we still are." The peaceful moment was shattered by a commotion from the canyon entrance. They both rose quickly, hurrying back toward the camp to find one of the messengers had returned alone, his horse lathered from hard riding. The young warrior was speaking rapidly to Chief Quanah in their language, gesturing eastward with obvious urgency. Luke strode forward, concern evident in his posture. "What's happened?" he asked as soon as there was a pause in the conversation. Quanah's expression was grave. "Montgomery's men caught them near Mesa Junction. Gray Wolf was captured, Swift Deer escaped to bring warning." He gestured to the exhausted warrior. "Montgomery knows of our involvement now. His men tortured the information from Gray Wolf before killing him." Willow gasped in horror, both at the young warrior's fate and the implications for the tribe. "They're coming here." Swift Deer spoke again, and Quanah translated. "Montgomery leads them himself. Many men with wagons of supplies. They camp tonight at Broken Rock, will reach the valley entrance by tomorrow noon." The news hit like a physical blow. Their sanctuary would soon become a trap unless they acted quickly. "We must move again," Luke said immediately. "Deeper into Comanche territory, or perhaps west toward—" "No." Quanah's voice was firm. "My people have run enough. This is our ancestral land. If Montgomery brings war to us, he will find we remember how to fight." The determination in the chief's voice was matched by nods from the warriors gathering around him. This was no longer just about protecting Willow or bringing Montgomery to justice. It had become a matter of tribal honor and sovereignty. Luke recognized the shift immediately. "This isn't your fight, Quanah. Montgomery is after us, not your people. He killed my warrior. He enters our hunting grounds with armed men. He shows no respect for boundaries or peace treaties." Quanah's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "It became our fight when he made it so." Willow stepped forward, addressing the chief directly. "I cannot bear responsibility for bringing more death to your people, Chief Quanah. Luke is right, we should leave, draw Montgomery away from here." Quanah studied her for a long moment. "You have courage, woman, but this is not your decision to make. Montgomery has been our enemy since he first came to this territory. Perhaps the spirits brought you here so that finally we might face him together, whites and Comanche as allies." The concept was revolutionary in all the conflicts between settlers and native tribes. Rarely had they made common cause against a shared enemy. Yet here, in this hidden canyon, circumstances had aligned to create just such an alliance. Luke exchanged a glance with Willow, seeing in her eyes the same realization he had reached. They could not dissuade Quanah from this course. The question now was how to minimize bloodshed while ensuring Montgomery faced justice for all his crimes. "If we fight together," Luke said carefully, "it must be with a plan that does more than just defeat Montgomery's current force. We need to expose his corruption so thoroughly that he can never threaten your people or anyone else again." Quanah nodded slowly. "How would you do this?" Luke looked to Willow, an idea forming. "We need witnesses. Reputable witnesses who can testify to Montgomery's actions, not just our word against his." Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes. "The sheriff," she said. "If he saw Montgomery's private army attacking a peaceful Comanche camp, he couldn't ignore it, regardless of Montgomery's influence." "Exactly." Luke turned back to Quanah. "We don't just need to defeat Montgomery, we need to lure him into showing his true nature before witnesses who cannot be corrupted or silenced." A slow smile spread across the chief's weathered face. "A trap within a trap. You think like Comanche Blackwood." He gestured for his warriors to gather closer. "Come, we will make plans while there is still darkness to work in." As the strategic council formed, Willow felt a strange calm settle over her. Tomorrow would bring danger, perhaps even death. Yet looking at Luke's focused expression as he and Quanah bent over a map of the canyon, she knew with certainty that whatever happened, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The desperate woman who had waded into the river seeking oblivion was truly gone. In her place stood someone who had found purpose, courage, and love, someone willing to fight not just for her own future, but for justice that would protect many others. And that, she realized, was perhaps the greatest transformation of all. The plan they devised was both simple in concept and complex in execution. Rather than waiting for Montgomery's forces to reach the hidden canyon, they would create the illusion that Willow and Luke had separated from the Comanche, apparently fleeing northeast toward the territorial capital. "Montgomery will split his forces," Luke explained as they finalized the details before dawn. "He'll send most men after us, while maintaining a smaller group to deal with the Comanche, whom he still suspects of harboring us. And that's when we spring the trap," Hank added with grim satisfaction. The trap had multiple layers. First, they would send riders to Redemption Creek carrying messages for the sheriff and several prominent citizens, informing them of Montgomery's private army and inviting them to witness his actions firsthand. Doc Phillips, as a respected former physician, would deliver these messages personally. His standing in the community would ensure they were taken seriously. Second, Luke and Willow, accompanied by Hank and Miguel, would leave obvious tracks heading northeast, drawing the bulk of Montgomery's forces away from the Comanche camp. After a few miles, they would double back through a series of ravines known only to Quanah's scouts, positioning themselves to observe Montgomery's actions without being detected. Finally, the Comanche warriors would create a defensive position that appeared vulnerable but was actually a carefully orchestrated ambush point. designed not to kill Montgomery's men but to trap and disarm them once the witnesses from town had arrived. The timing must be perfect, Luke emphasized as the first light of dawn touched the canyon rim. If the townspeople arrive too late, they'll miss seeing Montgomery's aggression. If they arrive too early, he might restrain himself. The spirits will guide the timing, Quanah said with confidence. This plan has their blessing. As preparations began, Willow sought out Little Dove to say goodbye. The Comanche woman embraced her with genuine affection, then pressed a small beaded pouch into her hand. "Protection," she explained simply, "from my grandmother, very powerful medicine." Touched by the gift, Willow impulsively removed the gold locket she wore, the last gift from her father before his death. "For you," she said, placing it around Little Dove's neck, "to remember our friendship." Little Dove touched the locket reverently. "May your path be straight and your heart strong, sister." The farewell complete, Willow joined Luke and the others at the canyon entrance. Doc had already departed for Redemption Creek, taking a circuitous route to avoid Montgomery's forces. Now it was their turn to set the main part of the plan in motion. Luke helped Willow mount her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, we don't separate." The intensity in his eyes conveyed all the words left unspoken: his fear for her safety, his determination to protect her, his love that had grown stronger with each passing day. "Together," she agreed, covering his hand with her own. "Always." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, leaving deliberately obvious tracks as they headed northeast from the canyon. For 2 hours they maintained this course, making no attempt at concealment, even talking loudly at times to ensure any scouts would hear them. Then, at a predetermined point, they veered sharply west into a dry creek bed, where the rocky ground would hold no tracks. From there, they followed a complex route that Quanah had described, using natural features that would hide their passage: ridge lines, stone outcroppings, shallow caves that connected to hidden trails. By mid-morning, they had circled back to a position overlooking the valley approach to the Comanche camp. From their vantage point high on the limestone bluff, they could see Montgomery's forces arriving exactly as Swift Deer had predicted: nearly 30 men. Well armed, with supply wagons suggesting they were prepared for an extended operation. "There he is," Willow whispered, spotting Gilbert Montgomery at the head of the column. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable, straight-backed in the saddle, gesturing authoritatively to his men as he organized their approach. Luke studied the force through a spyglass he'd borrowed from Doc. "They're splitting up already. Looks like Montgomery's sending about 20 men to follow our northeasterly tracks. He's keeping 10 with him to approach the Comanche camp. Will that be enough men for Quanah's trap to work?" Willow asked anxiously. "It's not the number that matters, but Montgomery himself," Luke replied. "As long as he's personally involved in threatening the Comanche, we have what we need." They watched as the larger group of riders departed, following the false trail Luke and the others had left. Montgomery remained with the smaller force, organizing them into a formation that was clearly offensive rather than defensive, a semicircle designed to surround the narrow entrance to the canyon where the Comanche appeared to be camped. "He's not even trying to approach peacefully," Hank observed from beside them. "No flag of truce, no attempt at parley." "Because he believes he doesn't need to," Luke said grimly. "In his world, the Comanche are obstacles to be removed, not people to be respected." Another hour passed as Montgomery's men moved into position. From their hidden vantage point, Luke's group could see the trap being prepared: Comanche warriors concealed among the rocks above the canyon entrance, others positioned behind false teepees that had been erected to make the camp appear occupied. "Where are the women and children?" Willow asked suddenly, realizing she couldn't see any of the families she had come to know. "Quanah sent them deeper into the canyon network," Miguel explained. "There are caves that connect to another valley 3 miles west. They'll be safe there until this is resolved." The knowledge relieved Willow's immediate concern, but anxiety still knotted her stomach as she watched Montgomery prepare to attack people who had shown her nothing but kindness. How much longer until the witnesses from town arrive? Luke checked the sun's position. Doc should have reached Redemption Creek by now. If the sheriff and others left immediately, they could be here within the hour. And if they don't come, the question had to be asked. Then we proceed with the backup plan, Luke said quietly. We have evidence of Montgomery's illegal activities in my saddlebags documents Miguel retrieved from the ranch before we evacuated. If we can't bring witnesses to Montgomery, we'll bring the evidence to the territorial judge. Willow nodded, drawing strength from Luke's steady confidence. Whatever happened, they had multiple paths forward. Montgomery's days of unchecked power were numbered, one way or another, just as Montgomery appeared ready to order his men to advance on the canyon entrance. A distant cloud of dust on the western horizon caught everyone's attention. Luke trained the spyglass in that direction, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "It's Doc," he announced. "And he's brought company the sheriff, Judge Wilson, Reverend Thompson, and at least 6 other men from town. Looks like they brought the newspaper editor too." Hope surged through Willow. They actually came. "Doc can be very persuasive," Luke said with satisfaction, "and it seems Sheriff Daniels may have found his conscience after all." They watched as Montgomery spotted the approaching riders and hastily revised his plans, ordering his men to pull back into a less obviously aggressive formation. But it was too late. The witnesses had already seen the initial positioning, the weapons at the ready, the clear intent to attack a peaceful camp. The next hour unfolded like a carefully orchestrated play. The townspeople arrived, demanding explanations from Montgomery, who attempted to justify his armed force as necessary protection while searching for his abducted wife. Sheriff Daniels, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, questioned why Montgomery needed so many armed men to retrieve one woman. Then, just as Montgomery was spinning his tale, Quanah sprung the trap. Comanche warriors appeared from concealment all around Montgomery's men, not attacking but effectively surrounding them, making escape impossible without bloodshed. "Now," Luke said, mounting his horse, "it's time for us to join the scene." They rode down from their hidden position, approaching the standoff from the east, a direction neither Montgomery nor the townspeople were watching. The expressions of shock on all faces as Luke, Willow, Hank, and Miguel calmly rode into the midst of the confrontation would have been comical under different circumstances. "Mr. Montgomery," Luke called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering, "I believe you're looking for us." Gilbert Montgomery's handsome face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Blackwood, you dare show yourself, and my wife—" "I am not your wife, Gilbert," Willow interrupted, her clear voice steady as she addressed not just Montgomery but the assembled witnesses. "I never was. Our wedding ceremony was never completed because I fled when I discovered your role in my father's financial ruin and subsequent death." Judge Wilson stepped forward, his judicial authority evident in his bearing despite the unusual setting. "These are serious allegations, Miss Lancaster. Do you have evidence to support them?" "We do, Your Honor," Luke replied, removing documents from his saddlebag. "Bank records showing the systematic manipulation of loans to force Mr. Lancaster into bankruptcy, coinciding precisely with Montgomery's acquisition of other properties along the proposed railroad route." The judge accepted the papers, scanning them with a practiced eye while Montgomery blustered denials. Sheriff Daniels moved closer to examine the documents as well, his expression darkening as he recognized the pattern they revealed. "Furthermore," Willow continued, addressing the assembled townspeople directly, "Mr. Montgomery threatened my life when I confronted him with this knowledge, and has since pursued me with armed men across territorial boundaries, even killing a Comanche warrior who refused to reveal my location." This last accusation caused a ripple of shock among the witnesses. Violence against settlers was one thing, but the deliberate murder of a native person during peacetime was a federal offense that even Montgomery's influence might not be able to overcome. Lies, Montgomery shouted, his composure cracking. All lies fabricated by a mentally unstable woman and her lover. Then how do you explain this armed force prepared to attack a Comanche camp that has treaty protection? Sheriff Daniels asked, finding his voice at last. Or the 20 other men you sent north, hunting through territory that isn't yours? Montgomery's eyes darted between the sheriff, the judge, and the increasingly hostile expressions of the townspeople he had long controlled through money and fear. For the first time, Willow saw uncertainty in his face, the realization that his power had limits, that there were lines even he couldn't cross without consequences. I was protecting my interests, he said stiffly. Any man would do the same. No, Montgomery, Luke countered quietly. A man of honor wouldn't manipulate an innocent woman's father into suicide for financial gain. He wouldn't raise a private army to hunt down a woman who rejected him. And he certainly wouldn't order the torture and murder of a Comanche warrior during peacetime. The simple truth of Luke's words seemed to resonate with everyone present. Even Montgomery's own men shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding their employer's gaze as if suddenly questioning their loyalty. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. Sheriff Daniels, I believe we have sufficient cause to take Mr. Montgomery into custody pending a full investigation of these allegations. Please disarm him and his men. You can't be serious, Montgomery exploded. On the word of a hysterical woman and a rancher with a personal grudge, I am the most prominent businessman in this territory. Which is precisely why these allegations must be properly investigated, the judge replied firmly. Your position doesn't place you above the law, Mr. Montgomery. If anything, it demands you be held to a higher standard. As the sheriff moved to carry out the judge's orders, Montgomery made one desperate attempt to regain control. He drew a concealed derringer from his coat, pointing it directly at Willow. This ends now, he snarled. If I can't have her, no one will. Everything happened in an instant. Luke spurring his horse forward, placing himself between Willow and the weapon. Chief Quanah's arm moving in a blur as he threw a hunting knife with deadly accuracy. Montgomery screaming as the knife pinned his hand to the wooden wagon wheel behind him, the derringer falling harmlessly to the ground. In the stunned silence that followed, Sheriff Daniels quickly restrained the wounded Montgomery, who continued to curse and threaten even as he was led to a wagon for transport back to town. Chief Quanah, Judge Wilson said formally, addressing the Comanche leader with respect. On behalf of the territorial government, I apologize for this invasion of your lands. Mr. Montgomery will face justice for his actions against your warrior. Quanah inclined his head in acknowledgement. Justice is good, peace is better. Let both prevail from this day. As Montgomery and his disarmed men were led away under guard, the tension that had hung over the valley for days finally began to dissipate. Willow found herself surrounded by townspeople, many apologizing for believing Montgomery's lies about her mental state, others expressing admiration for her courage in standing against such a powerful adversary. Through it all, Luke remained at her side, his solid presence a reminder of everything they had endured together and the promise of what might now be possible. When the crowd finally dispersed, preparations underway to return to Redemption Creek, Luke drew Willow aside to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. It's over, he said softly, his eyes searching hers. Montgomery will face trial, and with those witnesses and documents, he won't escape justice this time. Thanks to you, Willow replied, reaching up to touch his face. You risked everything for me, Luke, your ranch, your safety, your future. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. The ranch can be rebuilt, a life with you that's irreplaceable. Tears of joy and relief filled Willow's eyes. When you pulled me from that river and said not today, I had no idea you were saving me for us. Neither did I, Luke admitted with a smile. But standing here now, looking at you, I can't imagine any other path that would have felt so right. He drew her into his arms, and as they embraced against the backdrop of the wild Texas landscape that had both threatened and sheltered them, Willow knew with absolute certainty that the river that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to a love deeper and truer than anything she could have imagined. "Not today," she whispered against his chest, echoing his words from that fateful first meeting. "Not ever." Luke's arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion. "That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." Epilogue: 2 years later, the Red River flowed peacefully beneath the spring sunshine, its waters considerably less threatening than they had been that fateful day when Luke had pulled Willow from its current. They sat together on its banks, a picnic spread before them, celebrating the second anniversary of their wedding. Much had changed in those 2 years. Gilbert Montgomery had been convicted of multiple crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of the Comanche warrior. His business empire had crumbled, with the ill-gotten properties returned to their rightful owners, including the Lancaster family land, which now formed the eastern boundary of the Blackwood Ranch. The ranch itself had been rebuilt, larger and more prosperous than before. Luke's reputation for fairness and courage during the Montgomery affair, as the newspaper had dubbed it, had brought him respect throughout the territory. He now served on the town council, working alongside Sheriff Daniels, a changed man since standing up to Montgomery to ensure justice prevailed for all citizens, regardless of wealth or influence. Chief Quanah and his people had benefited as well. The territorial government, embarrassed by Montgomery's actions and impressed by the Comanche's restraint, had formalized their rights to their traditional hunting grounds. Little Dove visited the ranch often, teaching Comanche crafts and medicine to interested townswomen, building bridges between cultures that had long been separated by mistrust. But the most significant change sat gurgling happily on a blanket between Luke and Willow, their 6-month-old daughter, Rebecca Sarah Blackwood, named for Luke's first wife and his sister, both women who had shown Willow kindness when she needed it most. "She has your eyes," Luke observed, watching as the baby reached for a butterfly floating past. "Same determination, too," Willow smiled, catching her daughter's hand before she could put a wildflower in her mouth. "And your stubbornness. Doc says he's never seen a baby so intent on doing things her own way." "Speaking of Doc, he and Sarah seem to be spending a lot of time together lately," Luke remarked with a knowing smile. "Hank says he caught them holding hands behind the church last Sunday." "About time," Willow laughed. "Sarah's been sweet on him for months." They fell into comfortable silence, watching their daughter explore the world around her with boundless curiosity. The river murmured beside them, a constant reminder of beginnings rather than endings. "Do you ever think about it?" Luke asked quietly. "What might have happened if I hadn't been tracking that buck that day?" Willow leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Sometimes. But then I look at our life now, our home, our family, all we've built together, and I know that somehow we would have found each other anyway." "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his arm slipping around her waist. She turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting the wisdom that had come through suffering and redemption. "Because some people are meant to save each other, Luke. Not just once, but every day in 1,000 small ways." He kissed her then, tenderly, reverently, as their daughter babbled happily beside them and the river that had once nearly claimed Willow's life flowed on. A testament to the journey that had brought them to this moment, two souls who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to build a future neither could have imagined alone. As they gathered their belongings to head home, Willow took one last look at the river. "Thank you," she whispered to the waters that had once seemed so final, so tempting in her despair. Luke, catching her words, understood without explanation. He lifted their daughter into his arms and offered Willow his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Blackwood, we've got a ranch to run and a life to live." Hand in hand, they walked away from the river, not as cowboy and bride, rescuer and rescued, but as partners whose love had been forged in the wild heart of Texas, a love strong enough to last a lifetime and beyond.